Scott Bell.
Let's take a walk on the wild side.
Oh, righty then. You're everywhere, baby. Radio, TV, the papers. Am I right or am I right or am I right? Right.
Robert Scott Bell.
My voice may be raspy because I've been at it at the Autism One, but I've got my relief pitcher, my bullpen, the rock behind it all. Jeffrey Smith joins me. He's back on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Jeffrey, my goodness, it's so good to see you.
Great. Give me that ball. I want to pitch.
Yeah, you go. Last time we talked was around the time of the controversy in Connecticut with the governor, a backroom deal at the last second, saying, oh, well, we got to pull this GMO thing out because, oh, my gosh, we might get sued by Monsanto, right? But here we are at Autism One with a special conference. They brought you in to speak on GMOs. What kind of information are linking it? We've got enough disasters coming from the vaccine community, so to speak, but I've argued that the GMOs are really contributing and accelerating this whole dilemma.
I think that's right. I mean, no one could say for sure, but if you look at the evidence, it's pretty compelling. For example, Dr. Don Huber, a professor emeritus from Purdue University, was giving a lecture in Germany in October and described the behavioral, neurophysiological, and gut changes in animals that are fed genetically modified feed. And an autism expert and doctor came up to him afterwards and said, this is exactly what we're seeing in autistic children. And in fact, we have written up these details. I'm going to give a URL out right now, responsibletechnology.org/autism. There I have a long article which has citations about these links, which I'll describe now to you, as well as a short video that we did at Mercola Studio. So the behavioral changes are very interesting. From more an anecdotal perspective, we hear from farmers and veterinarians that when they switch their animals to non-GMO feed after they have been on GM feed for a while, the behavior changes. They get less aggressive. And I've heard this from many people, they get happier. Somehow there's a sense of irritation or aggression or antisocial behavior. So I heard from one veterinarian who said that his clients' pigs on GM corn were sometimes they'd have like an Alzheimer's thing where they couldn't find the feed pen and they'd die, or they would bite the ears and tails off the others. But when they switched to non-GM, those went away. And that's just in the livestock. We've seen the same thing in laboratory animals. In Moscow, we found male rats, female rats, and their offspring all were more aggressive and more violent on genetically modified soy. And even an undergraduate study in Holland many years ago found that when mice were fed GM soy and corn combination, compared to those in the control that were fed the non-GM, there was agitation, fear, running around the thing, trying to escape. Yeah. And there's also a more antisocial behavior of certain rats that that they just stay alone and they don't interact, whereas those on the non-GM feed could be picked up and pet like a pet. Sure.
Yeah, I saw a study recently on rats, and a drug study that showed, in this study the rats got cancer, but this has nothing to do with humans. And I thought, wait a second, don't you choose rats specifically so you can predict what happens to you? And they went, wait, but this time, no, not this time. Every other time, yes. And so I imagine them saying the same thing with GMO foods. Well, but that's a rat, not the kids. And I'm sure, though, that the people in the audience here at Autism One where you spoke really understood, because they're seeing these behaviors and they're so identical to what they've seen with the focal point on vaccine damage, which is very real, but I know it's everything. And a big part of this is that diet. We've talked about years past, the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, on and on and on, but now the modifications creating a disastrous scenario, and that's an understatement,
And let's take a look at the physiological changes. I mean, that's a good point. What is exactly happening inside the body when you eat these things? And to be clear about what GMOs are, your audience knows genetically modified organisms transfer genes between species, but another level, they're either poison drinkers or poison producers. The poison drinkers are those that can be sprayed with herbicides like Roundup, and there's more of the Roundup inside the food we eat, or they produce their own toxic pesticide which breaks open the stomach of insects and kills them. Now, there's also, in addition to those specific problems, higher amounts of Roundup and higher amounts of this Bt toxin in our bodies, and we can talk about that in terms of autism. Just the process of genetic engineering itself causes massive collateral damage. Up to 5% of the natural functioning genes in a plant can change their levels of expression, increasing allergens, toxins, etc. And that is one reason why GMOs may be dangerous and linked to autism. We saw one beautifully designed study where they controlled out the influence of the inserted gene, and so it was just showing the influence of the process itself, and the gut went crazy. The stomach lining was practically double in size. The architecture of the walls of the intestines were completely different. Proliferative cell growth, this is potentially precancerous. I was talking to one pediatrician who was awarded the distinction of being one of the top pediatricians in America for 5 years in a row, and she looked at the slides of the guts of the rats fed genetically modified crops and said, this is what we're seeing in children. They're having tremendous digestive problems, failure to thrive, allergies to everything, etc., etc. So the generic process itself can mess up the digestive tract, but then you have the specific traits. We mentioned two, Roundup Ready and Bt toxin. Mm-hmm. So let's save the Bt toxin for last, because that's the heavy one. Yes. That's the one that's going to get people to rethink everything they put in their mouths. Roundup was originally patented as a broad-spectrum chelator. It actually hugs nutrients and doesn't let them go. So it actually, if we eat Roundup, it can make nutrients unavailable for assimilation. The animals eat the Roundup Ready crops, and so they become nutrient deficient. We eat the nutrient deficient animals. We eat the nutrient deficient plants. And so that's one issue. And I just learned at Autism One that B12 is an issue for autistic kids, according to some. And one of the most chelated nutrients in the spectrum of chelation by Roundup is cobalt, which is something that's involved in B12 metabolism. And B12, it means that if you eat Roundup Ready crops or crops sprayed with Roundup, then you may have difficulty in the metabolism of B12.
Sure, and this accelerates what I've talked about for years of the toxin proficiencies. It's bad enough that they're toxic to cells, but when you're relating what you're just saying, we encourage or increase the acceleration of the nutritional deficiency syndrome, right? Mm-hmm. And so, they're all connected, but what you're bringing up is even more horrifying because it's accelerating that which we've already known from a general toxicity perspective, leading to deficiencies. And it's almost like this is pesticide-induced deficiency on some kind of steroid, if you will. Right. And as shocking as the things I've covered all these years, to see this happening at this level, at this rate, it's even more so.
And, if you look at the veterinary reports of lab animal testing of organs of deceased livestock, they're finding a universal deficiency linked to Roundup Ready crops, particularly manganese, which is not only suppressed by Roundup, it's also suppressed by the insertion of the Roundup Ready gene, but also selenium and other things. And the nutrient deficiencies are causing sick, diseased cows, sometimes stillborn, sometimes reproductive disorders. So that's one level. Now, Roundup itself is toxic and hormone disruptive. It causes endocrine disruption, problems with the production of estrogen. It's linked to cancer, Parkinson's, lower sperm counts, abnormal sperm. It's linked to quite a number of diseases, and it's also, again, it's eaten directly in the food. It also has antibiotic properties. Now, anyone who's involved with autism or gut function should be, like, the bell should be ringing. You're eating an antibiotic, and what does that mean? It means it kills bacteria. We know, and I'm sure you've discussed this probably 1,000 times in this show, the importance of healthy gut bacteria. There's 10 times the number of cells in the gut than there is in the body in terms of bacterial guts.
Right.
Yeah, bacterial cells.
We rely so much on the microbial world. It's to some embarrassing, to some it's humbling. I mean, the fact is that that's the interdependence of all of creation, of nature.
Yeah. Someone yesterday at the conference said we're 9/10 bacteria. So that's the humbling part.
Yes.
So we have a situation where we're eating an antibiotic that kills off gut bacteria. Now, it's interesting that when you look at the Roundup active ingredient glyphosate, that kills off a controlling positive gut bacteria in cows that controls the growth of botulism. And when you kill that off, botulism could increase, and it can, and it is on the increase. And now chronic botulism at low levels is also linked to sudden infant death syndrome, and so that may be linked to Roundup. So it's getting a little bit more interesting. But with autism, we have a situation where one of the common characteristics described by practitioners and researchers is dysfunctional or out of balance gut bacteria. I interviewed 2 different veterinarians and said, what have you seen different in the livestock since GMOs were introduced? Both talked about gut bacteria. One said something that was formerly benign had just basically taken off and become pathogenic. Another one talked about just a complete disbalance. He had to create some kind of yogurt out of the normal gut flora to give to animals, and that wasn't the case before these Roundup Ready crops. So that's some of the influence of Roundup on the overall health. And so we have so far covered 2 points that are related to autism. One is the behavior, and the other is the gut bacteria. But there's more with Roundup Ready crops with gut bacteria, and this is kind of scary.
Well, but before you get into that, I was just thinking to let everybody know of the wide uses around it. What kind of crops? I mean, It's not like just one. It's only corn, right? I mean, this is pretty frightening.
It's Roundup Ready soy. It's Roundup Ready corn, canola, cottonseed oil, sugar beets used for sugar, alfalfa, and they also spray Roundup on a whole set of grains to kill them all or to dry them down at the end so that they can harvest all together. So lentils and things may have Roundup in them. I focus more on the Roundup Ready crops because there's far more Roundup in them, and we need to get rid of those. And Roundup is because it's overused, it's pervasive. It's found in 60 to 100% of the air samples, the rain samples, the surface water samples, groundwater samples, as well as in blood and urine. So it's Monsanto's version of omnipresence.
Yes.
Now, they took an evaluation of people who had eaten genetically modified soy, and they were looking to see if the soy, the DNA that was genetically engineered, survived passage through the stomach and small intestines. This was a UK government study, or UK-funded study, and the theory was that genes were destroyed during digestion, so gene transfer from the food we eat to gut bacteria is not possible. Well, this study, published in 2004, turned that around. In fact, it's the only human feeding study ever published on GMOs, and it confirmed that the genes do survive the digestive process, some of them, and through the stomach and small intestine. But in 3 of the 7 human subjects, the genes from a previous meal, had already transferred out of their food into the DNA of gut bacteria. And that bacteria was not killable with Roundup's active ingredient glyphosate, suggesting that it was active. In other words, long after we stop eating genetically modified foods, we may still have these proteins produced continuously inside of us. So somehow our gut bacteria may be colonized by GMOs, which could also further disrupt the balance. And if you think logically, if you have Roundup Ready gut bacteria and you have non-Roundup Ready gut bacteria and you're eating Roundup in your crops, it's going to kill off the non-colonized version, because that's what it does. It's an antibiotic, and allow the other ones to live long and multiply, so it can cause a complete shift in the normal gut balance.
Pesticide-resistant gut bacteria is horrific. It just is. And, I always want to focus on remediation. Of course, in an external world, environmental world, you're working extensively on remediating this and stopping it. I look also at the physiology of each individual that comes to me for help, and I look at the things we can do to hopefully overwhelm that. And homeopathy, I think, is very promising because we can actually utilize those very toxic poisons to help to counteract it on one level. But that's just, we're at the preliminary phases of experimenting and seeing where this is going. So as we take on this horrific information, we got to go back out to the world and go, how do we stop this? What more can we do? Exactly.
That's the second most common question is asked to me. What can I do if my gut bacteria has been colonized? Now, being colonized by Roundup Ready proteins, that's a problem because that protein has properties of a known allergen, a dust mite allergen. So if you're allergic to dust, you might be allergic to these proteins, and you might be continuously triggered. And that might cause inflammation, and inflammation in the gut can lead to everything, everything wrong. Now, what if the corn chips that you eat, which contain not only the Roundup Ready genes, but the Bt toxin producing genes transfers. Now, Bt toxin is from a soil bacterium, and they take the gene from the bacteria, and they put it into the corn or cotton, and now the plant produces its own toxic insecticide designed to break open the stomach of insects and kill them. And the biotech industry and the EPA swore up and down that it was completely species-specific, had no impact on human cells, was completely destroyed during digestion, and all of those were wrong. It turns out in Canada last year they found Bt toxin in 93% of the pregnant women they tested, 80% of their unborn fetuses, and this year in the Journal of Applied Toxicology they found that when they took Monsanto's Bt toxin and applied it to human cells, it punched holes in those cells, causing leakage, which is probably the exact same way it kills insects. So now we eat the Bt toxin, which can punch holes in the cells, and what do we hear about autistic kids? A lot of them have leaky gut. And this is what people consider as possibly one of the causative factors, where the undigested foods go into the bloodstream, causing an immune system response, an inflammation response, possibly autoimmune response. Then it goes through the blood through the blood-brain barrier, causing cognitive dysfunction. And we may be colonizing the gut bacteria of North Americans with a toxin designed to poke holes in our digestive walls.
Yeah, and Hollywood just keeps portraying that they're going to be outer space beings coming to colonize us. We're being colonized by Monsanto right here on the planet.
Yes, absolutely.
Really extraordinary.
Now, it's interesting that when you look at the animal feeding studies, like there was I hear from farmers, I'm in a unique position traveling and talking about this. People come up to me and describe stories, which we're now compiling into a film that'll be out next month. And the stories, I was just published one story about a Danish farmer who took his pigs off of Roundup Ready soy starting about a year ago, and the diarrhea problem ended in 2 days. He had massive diarrhea, lots of deaths, ended in 2 days. That's one digestive problem. Well, he had 36 deaths in the 2 years prior based on ulcerations and bloat. In the year since changing, no deaths. That's another digestive disorder. He had 2 pigs die the previous year of lack of appetite. Didn't happen this year. Another digestive disorder. He had infectious diseases drop so much that his use of antibiotics dropped by 2/3. His litter size over an 8-month period went from 28 to 30. The amount of time he had to spend per pig dropped dramatically. The birth defect rate, they had 13 live live defective births before, not since. And Roundup is linked to birth defects in a big way. So that's just the Roundup Ready soy side.
Yeah.
Then I talked to another farmer who just got rid of the corn that was genetically engineered from his pigs, and he was still feeding the Roundup Ready soy, and he noticed dramatic changes. The behavior of the pigs changed. The overall health improved, the prevalence of disease went away, and he realized that when he had switched to genetically engineered corn back 14 years ago, all these problems started, but he blamed it on something else, and when he switched back, he realized, no, it was the genetically engineered crops.
So what you share also bodes well for the natural remediation, that simply the stopping of the inflow.
Absolutely.
That nature is so resilient that it will fight back for that real balance, for that health. Nature begets health, the life, and all of that.
Perfect. And this leads to the last point. And the last point for me is that we are now, for the first time, collecting case studies of people who go from GM to non-GM. And we're looking for autism, we're looking for everything. And so people can send an email to us at healthy@responsibletechnology.org, healthy@responsibletechnology.org. And we have one case study in the article that's published now on responsibletechnology.org/autism of a woman whose son was about 80% recovered from autism, and she was on 80% organic. And she started saying this so many times, and she realized maybe there's a correlation. So she switched to 100% organic, and there's nearly complete recovery since. And I just spoke to her husband last night. He is a medical doctor and a DAN doctor for autistic consultations, and he knows it from his experience as well, that when he takes his clients and suggests that they switch to organic non-GMO foods, they get better. The symptoms are reduced in terms of the autistic spectrum.
Beautiful. Jeffrey, well, we got responsibletechnology.org. We've got healthy at responsibletechnology.org to send your stories in, GMO recoveries, things like that are being collected. Of course, we look forward to the new documentary coming out about what's happening here.
You'll definitely hear all about it. We'll be on talking about that. There's some secret stuff I'm not talking about yet. I'm waiting for it.
Well, the moment you're ready to break with it, we're here for you at the Robert Scott Bell Show. You know that, Jeffrey.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much.
My friend. Love you dearly.
The Robert Scott Bell Show. Welcome to the United States of Health Talk Radio. Health talk that doesn't suck.